Before I get started, I just want to take a quick pulse of this group. How many of you are in learning and development or talent development? Okay. How many of you have a great partnership with those on your HR team who do? Okay, wonderful. I'm hoping you're going to take copious notes. In full disclosure, I was originally scheduled to be in the talent management track. So I am not here to talk to you about a technology solution. I'm in fact going to talk to you about a DIY framework that I'm hoping you can take back to your organization. So career pathing. There was a great session in the other group by a gentleman from Eightfold AI talking about how you can use AI to build that career pathing framework. So I'm going to talk to you about something you can build on the backs of an Excel spreadsheet. You don't need an expensive HCM, nor do you need a legion of HR people to make it happen, but you can deliver real value for your organization. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides because you all know why career pathing is important. So let me get to the heart of it. When I joined Harvard Business Publishing, which is the home of HBR, there was no good mechanism for people to facilitate their own career movement. And what I found was sales was giving out director titles like it was candy, and HR was giving out none because we were holding the bar. And so what I wanted to do was develop a common language so that a director was a director was a director regardless of where you sat in the organization. And I also wanted to make it really easy for people to move up or across or whatever to chase their own ambitions. There was no clear mechanism for people to do that. The difference between the career pathing framework and performance management is this. Performance management is, frankly, what have you done for me lately? How did you do against your OKRs, your KPIs, your goals? The career pathing is an acknowledgement of your skill development. And the most apt analogy I have for this is, let's say you have a janitor. Greatest janitor you ever seen, exceeds expectations every year, wants to know why he's not getting promoted. The reason he will never become director of custodial services is because he's never acquired the right skills to do that. The career pathing framework tests to see whether or not you have now acquired the skills to be a director. You can exceeds expectations, you'll get the commensurate merit increases, but you won't get the promotional bump unless you've learned how to be a leader. That's what this system will give you. And it gives transparency to employees as well as managers. 3 components to this framework, and I'll share that with you. 3 tranches. Core, the pieces that apply to everybody. Leadership, anchored by whether or not you know how to inspire and motivate other people. And then, of course, the technical competencies that drive the work of our day. Built on 4 mastery levels: foundational, working, extensive, and expert. Now, when I was building out the system, I did a lot of research. And there were systems that had as many as 8 mastery levels. Too many. Can you tell me the difference between someone who's a 5 and a 6? Maybe between 7 and 8, but nobody can really split the hairs that cleanly. So I chose 4 because I think it's pretty obvious when you're a novice or when you're the CEO. With me? Okay. So this is the money shot, and it will build. And you see that I intentionally leave it on an Excel spreadsheet. I'm leaving it crude and primitive to show how easily you can do this yourself. And it scales. I started this at a tech startup with 100 people, and it scaled in an organization with close to 1,000, and I would wager that it would go to an organization that has 10,000. The challenge is most organizations don't even undertake the work. They sort of just make it up. They go by intuition. They know what good looks like, and they hope they can repeat the pattern. This makes it empirical and objective. Okay, so you see the levels, and you'll see that there are some in yellow. And the yellow highlight the fact that people have an individual contributor track. Not everybody wants to lead people. So we wanted to define a way where people could continue to progress in their careers while being an individual contributor. But we also determined that at some point, you needed to take on people, right? You had to do the really, really hard, nasty work that nobody else wants. So if you wanted to become a senior director, you needed to take on people. And you'll also see that there are numbers or letters, A, B, C. Those correspond to the salary bands. So it all comes together eventually. Okay, so this is where we have the core. This is the framework that we developed at Harvard Business Review. And for us, the core was a corresponding metric to our values. And our values were do what's right, do what's hard, do it with excellence. Your organization may have none. Your organization may have 10. 3 is actually the magic number. Our brain is wired to really easily remember things in 3s. So to the extent that you can distill your values down to things that are important in a grouping of 3, it makes it really easy to measure. And then there's also just a bit of math that I'll get to in a second. You'll see that there are colors, and then there are numbers. So the first time I developed this, I thought, wow, it's super clear. You go from light blue to medium blue, dark blue. And I had engineers look at me like, Angela, I don't know what that means, and oh, by the way, I'm colorblind. So I had to attach numbers to them. And all it means is foundational is 3 and expert is 15. That is also not math. But what you see is that it clearly stacks, right? So we say that if you're coming out of school, you're a coordinator, you have to know how to do what's right. That is not something we're going to teach you. So that is not a light blue. That is not foundational. That is working. But the other things, doing what's right and doing it with excellence, yeah, you're going to make mistakes. We hope you make a lot of mistakes. So we're going to peg those at light blue at foundational. But as you make your way up, you've got to progress. You cannot be a director unless you show up that way. And these are not negotiable. Okay? So everybody understands that the CEO better be a paragon of doing what's right, doing it with excellence, and doing what's hard. Okay. So then the next tranche is the technical competencies. And we've specifically limited this to only 5 because we believe that 80% of your work is driven by only a 20% of the universe of all the skills that are possible. And again, you'll see foundational, working, extensive, expert, building up. And it's intentionally generic, skill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say your team has 5 HRBPs. They're not all going to show up the same. But I have 5 HR technical competencies, and I need you to have at least, let's say, 2 of them at working if you want to become a senior manager. I don't care which 2, but you have to have at least 2. And the way this program works is you have to show that in order to get that promotion. This is not built on potential. This is on demonstrated mastery or expertise of that particular competency. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, moving on to the last tranche, which is the anchor, which is leadership. The first time I built this, I meant it only for people with formal people responsibility, but then it was made clear to me, but geez, I can be a scrum master, I can be a project manager, I can be heading up committee. Isn't that also leadership? And yes, it is. So we broadened that definition to include anybody who might have leadership responsibility. And you'll see that in the earliest stages, there are some gray boxes that just doesn't apply because you don't have the competence nor do you have the opportunity to demonstrate leadership. One of the things I will point out to you in particular is the director, the one that's not in white. And the reason is you'll see that there's a shift to the leadership. The emphasis becomes on their leadership, less on their technical abilities. Why? Because we believe that really good leaders will pull out the technical competencies of the people that they lead and manage. So I don't care for them to have as many dark blue boxes in the technical competencies. I want to see them show up in leadership. One of the best stories I had was this really ambitious finance manager. Had all the great credentials, went to a wonderful prep school, went on to an Ivy League, got his Harvard MBA, the whole thing. He wanted to know why he wasn't director of finance. And this was just as we were entering COVID. And I said, dude, because you don't play well with others. You go rogue, you go off and do your own thing. You've probably got 4 dark greens, but you're barely light blue in our values. And until you can fix that, you're not going any further. How simple was that conversation? And he knew I wasn't making it up because I could point to this rubric. And not only that, but I could show him the definitions of what it looks like to be a director under our values and under our leadership. He had no quibble. Guess what he went to work on? His core, his values. And aren't those the kinds of conversations that you want to be able to facilitate with your employees, that you want your managers to be equipped to have? So this is an example of what one of those career ladders look like. So at HBR, we had 20, and ironically, at the startup tech firm, fewer employees, but we had 30, because it was highly technical, highly specialized. Every career ladder has a sheet that looks like this. And I'm only showing you 2, but these are the 2 of HR. And we've clearly defined what it means at each level of expertise, foundational all the way through expert. And we built out one for marketing, we built out one for software engineering, we built out one for editorial, so on and so forth. And I caught a lot of flack because what I did was I asked the incumbents in the role to build this out. Well, Angela, aren't I doing the job of HR? Yeah, I am. Okay, so I'll go to the American Association of Marketers and I'll copy and paste and I'll plug it in, but it's not going to resonate. It won't be credible. I need it to be built by the people who do the job. And they agreed. So the longest part of this implementation was building these out because I was asking people to do it on top of their day jobs. It took them about 4 months. Now, this was done, 3 years ago, before consumer grade AI. I can imagine now that a single person could build this out in a day, which is absolutely frightening because it took us 5 people on each career ladder, 4 months. Unbelievable. So my mind is kind of blown at how easily you can do this work now that you can just punch it into ChatGPT. Give them a little bit information about your organization, your mission, your purpose, your objectives, your competitors, and it can give you a flawless definition of what this looks like for your organization. But this is where the work really lies, right? Identifying the technical competencies and then defining them. Okay, so how do you do this in your own organizations? First off, I asked my senior executive team to identify all the possible ladders. They gave me back like 50. My team and I went back and we synthesized them and got that down to 20, because y'all aren't that special. And we just don't want something that complicated, right? We're an organization of 600 people. If you're an organization of 10,000 people, you probably have more. Okay, but this is not a system that you want people not to be able to navigate. The whole point is they can find their way, right? I call this choose your own adventure, and I want the map to be as clear as possible. The second step then is to identify, once you've got the career ladders, then to identify the technical competencies. And that's where we had the incumbents come together. Some we had to voluntold to participate. Others happily raised their hands. And in the course of that work, I appointed each member of the executive team to be a champion of those ladders. So each ladder had an executive champion. So the CFO had a couple, the chief marketing officer had a few, I had a few, and we would iterate back and forth. Just the technical competencies, just identifying the top skills. Then they built out the mastery levels. Once we understood which were the 5 that were the most important for each career ladder, then they went to work on building out all the context underneath. It's now all published on the internet. You can see it at any time. And before I left, the plan was to put all of that into our work. Yes, we do have a multi-million-dollar HCM, but the plan was to put it all into Workday, have it captured in the competency module so we could take an inventory. So what we could say is, hey, I need someone who's an expert in XYZ. I could go in, ask Workday, would spit out a report and tell me who had it and at what mastery level. And then lastly, we had the rollout, which was teaching managers, employees how to use the system, what it meant for them, and how it could propel their careers in the directions of their choosing. What I would say was really fascinating was that when we rolled it out, 96% of employees were pegged to the right ladder and at the right level. And for those 4% who were not, we made a promise that upon rollout, we were not going to demote anyone, we weren't going to take away their pay. Our commitment was that we would spend the next 12 months with them, working with them to get them to the level that they were pegged at. If after a year they were unsuccessful, we would obviously have to have a different kind of conversation. But everybody thought that was pretty fair. And then we just hold one-on-ones and have conversations with people. So the beauty of this system is that it really becomes a flywheel for every other component of your people strategy. So if I'm looking to hire a marketing director, I pull up the marketing career ladder. I look at the competencies and the levels at which that marketing director should show. We actually then built an interview guide, yes, using AI, that would give us interview questions that would get at precisely those competencies and that expertise level. And it also drove consistency throughout the process because we knew we were pegging at the level we wanted. It also extremely helpful for succession planning. And do I have people who are ready to move into director, VP, senior VP? I can take a look at that based on where they are in their competencies. It also gives me good bench strength planning. So it really, and it drives our L&D. So if I know I have a huge gap because I don't have enough people who are expert in a particular area, I know I need to go tackle that. Whether I drive that training in-house or I send them somewhere else or what have you, I know where I have vulnerabilities. So it is really the flywheel for everything else that we've done in HR. This is not the first time I've given this talk. You're probably number 30. I was just in Vegas at a conference of 4,000 people. This is open source. I'm happy to have you use this. I am the only Angela Cheng-Cimini on LinkedIn. If you would like to learn more, you'd like to put your OD person in touch with me, please let them know that you heard me speak here, and I'm happy to talk more because I really do feel like this tackled some of the biggest problems we had. The reason the work started was I joined HBR, and it was just as the Great Resignation was happening. And I wanted to understand why people were leaving at the very same time that I was choosing to join. The number one reason was lack of career development. They could not envision themselves in a role beyond the one that they had in 3 or 4 years. I'm like, well, that's a problem I can solve. If you said pay, my hands are kind of tied, right? Because I can't just magic $1 million. But this I can fix. And it was no longer the #1 reason people left. It did become pay. So that was a whole nother thing. And I can talk about pay transparency too. But this was a problem that I could tackle and that I could solve. And again, importantly, it is something that you can do in-house. You just need executive sponsorship. And now less importantly, less critically, you need time. Again, AI is going to greatly, greatly facilitate this work. But you do need the commitment to do it. And you will get paid back in spades for this work. So sort of anti-HR tech, right? This is kind of old school HR work. But I do believe that it solves a number of problems that you might be facing with your own employees. So with that, I'll take any questions. Happy to flash back up any slides that you find interesting. Kian, can you help me out? Thank you.
So, in our organization, we have some immature managers that love to just say, well, HR told us this is the way that we're going to do things. And so do you have any advice about navigating sort of rolling something like this out, but also having strong enough buy-in where it doesn't just become if people don't like what they see or they're not completely bought into the definitions or their ranking? Like, any advice on navigating that?
That's why the executive champions are hugely important. They have to validate along every step of the process. So when your C-suite gets behind this, it's kind of difficult for a more junior manager to say, I disagree. I mean, they very well can. I'm not saying that they don't have a right to disagree, but they probably won't get a lot of traction. So you do need, again, executive sponsorship to the product of this. And it is accompanied by training, right? So we went and made sure that all our people leaders were equipped to answer the questions. And of course, we wanted to deal with their own career development questions. So we made sure that we tackled that audience first before we went to a broader organizational rollout. Oh, yeah, you have the microphone.
I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the competencies and the values, the actual, not analysis of when they start to put those numbers in, like a little bit more like who's involved in that, because I can also see, I'm trying to limit the bias in that as well, if that makes sense. So maybe in your experience, some highlights or keys of them picking those numbers a bit.
Picking those numbers. Can you say a little bit more?
Right. When you are giving a rating with each of those numbers, that ties to the other, I think your other sheet, right? That's how you can identify it. So I guess I'm looking at the consultation. Mm-hmm. Is there a number that correlates with each of those boxes? Okay. Or are you with those numbers putting in more subjective? Janice is a 10.
No.
In
Okay.
this area.
So again, the numbers and the colors correspond. So in this chart, foundational is 3, also means light blue. Working is a 5, medium blue. Extensive is dark blue, 10, and expert is 15, and dark green. So if you are an individual contributor, if you're a coordinator, and you want to move up to individual contributor, you need to demonstrate that you have at least one skill that has moved from working to foundational. So you reference this chart, of which there would be 5, I'm only showing you 2, and you say, okay, my consultation skill has moved from the foundational box to working.
Who's assessing that?
Okay, who's assessing that? So your manager is assessing that, and HR usually assists. That's a great point. So promotion into director level or above requires a panel. Everything else is a chain of the command. So your manager, your manager's manager, your manager's manager's manager, they approve, good. I'm going to assume that you know enough about how to run this system that I'm going to let you do that. But if you want to become a director, then we convene a panel of other directors, the people who will become your cohort, from across the organization to test whether or not you're really ready. Because we believe that that's an inflection point in your career. That to become a director, you need to really start demonstrating some pretty specialized and advanced and mature skills. So you need not just the approver of your own chain of command, who sometimes can be biased, but those of other people. And we do that for the VPs and certainly anybody who wants to go into the executive committee. Must go in front of a panel. HR facilitates and gets a vote. So that's how we maintain program integrity at higher levels of the organization. It also helps us to cap growth in those levels, right? We don't want to become too top heavy. You're welcome.
I know you said it wasn't technology, but thinking of the HCM and implementing this, for that transition from like a doer to a leader, does your HCM provide like you said learning and development, does it have like those courses where they can take more courses on leadership and things like that so they can obtain those skills?
That's actually a great point. So yes, actually our OD team built out what we called Level Up, and it's a 4-month program that teaches leadership and management skills. I actually wanted to go even more hardcore. So in the military, you have to go through boot camp, right? You have to go to officers boot camp. I would love to do that. I would love to send anybody who aspires to be a leader through something like that before they can even be considered to become a manager. I couldn't quite get the traction around that, but that's my ideal. Like, I really want people to go through the rigors and the discipline of knowing what it means to be a leader. Organizations fall apart because we have poor leadership. Not because sometimes because we have a poor strategy or lack of vision or because we're corrupt of values, whatnot. But if you have good leaders, right? I mean, I'm an HR person and I'm talking to other HR people, so I'm preaching to the choir. But I do strongly believe that organizations can't possibly overinvest in leadership training.
Hi, Angela. Thanks so much. So I'm the OD guy you were sort of alluding to that's going to bring
Great.
this back to my organization. So if I want to introduce, the concept of the scalable career ladder and ultimately get that executive buy-in, how would you go about that? I'm thinking, would you build like a prototype ladder sort of as a proof of concept, or what are the first sort of building blocks here?
You need to explain to your executive team why this is necessary. What's the business case for doing it? What problem are you solving? Right? In the same way that I was saying, okay, our attrition is pointing to lack of career development as a problem. I need the organization's time. They got behind it. Because attrition dropped precipitously after we did this. We went down to single digits. So start there before you even start building it out, right? Your foot forward should always be, how does this propel the business? Otherwise, it looks like another HR program that you're just doing because we find it sexy.
So maybe a nice opportunity to leverage data analytics as we
Yes.
saw this morning to sort of
Always.
build a business case.
Always.
Gotcha.
And then get your head of HR, right, go in together and make this case.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
I missed this. What's the relationship here between this model and the job descriptions?
Oh, great point. So the job description is simplistically the tasks and duties of the job. This is about the skills that you deploy to get those things done. So they're obviously related, but they're not the same. So when we do a job posting, for example, we'll highlight these are the key responsibilities. These are the 5 things you're expected to do. Build a strategic plan, do marketing, engage in social media. And then underneath, these are the competencies that you need to do that. So then we'll show up, okay, you need to do consultative selling, you need to do change management, whatever it is. So they're different, but obviously related.
But referenced in the
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I don't want interviews to be a surprise. I want candidates showing up knowing that I'm going to be probing to see whether or not they have the required skills. Interviews, I want to make them as comfortable as possible, right? I want people to show up as authentically as they can. I don't want them to be nervous. I don't want them to be intimidated by who we are. From the very get-go, I want them to understand that we're a welcoming and inclusive environment that wants them to succeed.
Did you use any assessment-based criteria to evaluate competencies? Because I wouldn't trust most of the managers in my organization to be able to do that really reliably.
So when you mean to identify the key
To
competencies?
evaluate the ratings. So let's say.
Oh, to evaluate the ratings. Okay. So like I said, we were fortunate that when we rolled it out, it was almost a near match. That everyone who was a manager showed up as a manager. Meaning that, and I know this because I would have heard from employees otherwise. And I just didn't get that kind of rabble-rousing. Most employees were like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm a manager. If anything, I probably have a little bit more growth to fully embrace that role. So I know that, to be sure. Now, do I know that it worked perfectly for promotions under director? I don't. But also my team, the organization was small enough that, since all promotion requests did have to come through HR, that we could sort of eyeball check. Not scalable if you're a much larger organization, but there were ways that we could do quality control. Any other questions? Okay, I think this timer is showing 10 seconds. So again, I'm hoping that was helpful. Angela, Cheng-Cimini, if you have any other questions, thank you.